Officer Ethan never expected an ordinary evening patrol to unravel into the most unforgettable night of his career. From the edge of the fading light, a tiny puppy stumbled into view, shaking, whimpering, and clinging to him as if he were its last hope. At first he assumed it was simply lost. But when the little pup tugged at his pant leg and began urging him toward the dark line of trees, a chill crept down Ethan's spine. Something wasn't right, and what waited for him inside that shadowed forest would stop him cold. A desperate struggle for life, a mother's silent cry for help, and a loyalty so fierce it would bring even a hardened officer to his knees. This wasn't just another call. It was a hidden miracle waiting to be found. Before we dive deeper into this astonishing story, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. It helps us bring you more stories that may touch your heart in unexpected ways. The sun was sinking beyond the quiet edges of Maple Ridge, casting long streaks of amber light across empty streets, as Officer Ethan wrapped up what had been one of the calmest evening patrols of his career. No calls, no noise, not even the usual late-shift chatter crackling through the radio. Just the soft rhythm of his boots, tapping the pavement, and the gentle hum of a town ready to sleep. After 12 hours on duty, Ethan was ready for nothing more than a warm shower, a cup of coffee, and a chance to rest his aching feet. He turned down the last corner toward his patrol car, exhaling slowly. The evening breeze carried the faint scent of pine and the distant buzz of power lines. Everything felt predictable, ordinary, until a faint rustle in the distance stopped him mid-step. It wasn't loud, just a soft scrabbling sound against gravel almost too small to notice. But Ethan's instincts sharpened instantly. Years on the force had trained him to listen to the things most people ignored. He tilted his head, eyes narrowing toward the dusty roadside. At first, nothing moved. Just shadows stretching in strange angles beneath the fading golden light. But then from the edge of the brush, a tiny figure stumbled into view. A puppy no more than a few weeks old, small enough to fit in 2 hands, its fur dusty and uneven, its floppy ears bouncing with each shaky step. The little creature seemed almost swallowed by the world around it. As it approached, the dying sunlight caught its eyes wide, dark shimmering with something that looked too deep for a dog so young. Ethan froze, more surprised than concerned at first. Puppies didn't just appear out here. Not in this part of town, not alone. He crouched instinctively, his hand brushing the radio at his chest. "Hey there, buddy," he murmured, voice gentle. To his surprise, the puppy didn't run, didn't shy away, didn't show fear at all. Instead, it toddled forward with trembling determination until it stood just inches from his boots. Then it tilted its tiny head up and released a soft, broken whimper, one so fragile that Ethan felt something twist painfully in his chest. He reached out a hand, slow and cautious, but before he could touch it, the puppy spun around, trotting a few steps away before stopping again. It looked back at him with urgent eyes, letting out another small cry. Ethan frowned. "You trying to show me something?" The puppy shadow, as Ethan would later call him, barked a sharp, tiny yelp that echoed louder than expected in the empty street. Then it hurried a few more feet, stopping once more to glance back, its posture tight with urgency. Most stray puppies wandered aimlessly searching for scraps or warmth. But this one wasn't wandering. It was leading. It was insisting. Ethan straightened the hairs on the back of his neck, prickling. Something was different here. Something unsettling. Something almost purposeful. He took a hesitant step forward. Shadow perked up, immediately barking again, before sprinting ahead, only stopping when Ethan slowed. Each time Ethan lingered, the pup circled frantically, pacing in tiny, desperate loops before letting out a trembling whine. The insistence in those cries was impossible to ignore. It was as if the little creature was begging him to hurry. "Okay," Ethan muttered under his breath, rubbing the tension from his neck. "You've got my attention." Deep down, a whisper of instinct stirred, an instinct trained by years of responding to emergencies that started with strange, quiet signs like this. A puppy didn't act like this unless something was wrong, something serious. So he followed. Shadow darted ahead, paws pattering against the dirt road, then paused again to check whether Ethan stayed behind him. Every glance was urgent, almost pleading, as though time itself was slipping away. Ethan kept pace, adjusting the flashlight strapped to his belt. The road soon narrowed, bending toward the edge of Maple Ridge Forest, a place locals avoided after sunset. Too many stories, too many dark trails where sunlight never reached. And tonight, with twilight fading fast, the forest looked like a black wall rising before them. Shadow didn't slow. He barked once, sharply, then disappeared between the first cluster of trees. Ethan hesitated. Something in his gut twisted harder. But the tiny, frightened cry that followed shattered any doubt left in him. He pushed into the woods. Branches scraped his uniform. Dry leaves crackled beneath his boots. The air turned colder, heavier, pressing around him like the forest itself was listening, waiting. His flashlight beam sliced through the darkness, illuminating patches of dirt, tangled roots, drifting particles that looked like floating ghosts in the pale light. Shadow ran ahead several feet, then stopped barking until Ethan caught up before racing further. It wasn't random. It was a path one carved by desperation. Minutes passed, though each one felt stretched thin. Ethan's mind raced with thoughts he didn't want. Injured animal, lost person, something worse. Every instinct screamed that whatever lay ahead wasn't ordinary. Then he heard it, a sound that froze him in place. Not Shadow's barking, not the wind. A low, weak, broken whimper, older, heavier, soaked in pain. A sound that didn't belong to the puppy at all. Shadow bolted toward it. "Shadow!" "Wait," Ethan called, quickening his steps. But the cries were growing louder, desperate, fading, pleading. Something or someone was suffering in the dark. Shadow's tiny silhouette stopped up ahead, tail stiff, ears forward, barking frantically at a patch of tangled brush. Ethan lifted his flashlight, breath locked in his throat. Something behind those branches trembled. And in that moment, just from the shape, the stillness, the fragile rise and fall, Ethan knew Shadow hadn't been looking for help for himself. He'd been looking for someone to save what waited in the darkness. Ethan steadied his breath as the beam from his flashlight trembled across branches, twisted like broken ribs jutting out of the forest floor. Shadow's frantic barking filled the dark silence, slicing through the heavy stillness as if urging him to hurry. Ethan stepped forward, the crunch of leaves beneath his boots sounding unnaturally loud in the suffocating quiet of the woods. He swept the light over the dense undergrowth again. For a moment, the forest seemed empty, just layers of shadows shifting with the wind. But then, something moved, a faint, shaky quiver beneath a fallen lattice of branches. Ethan froze. His heartbeat slammed against his ribs as the flashlight settled on the truth he hadn't dared imagine. Beneath the tangled debris lay a German shepherd, a mother dog so gaunt, so weak, so heartbreakingly thin that Ethan's stomach knotted instantly. Her fur, once thick and proud, hung in patchy tufts. Her ribs pressed sharply against her skin with each shallow breath. She lifted her head only slightly at the light. Her eyes glazed, but still aware, eyes full of fear, exhaustion, and something deeper. Desperation. Shadow rushed to her side, letting out a high-pitched whine before pressing his tiny body against her muzzle. He licked her face repeatedly, nudging her, as if willing her to stay awake, to stay alive. The mother responded with the faintest whimper, a sound so fragile that Ethan felt it like a punch to the chest. This wasn't a stray wandering by chance. This was a child begging him to save his mother. The realization hit Ethan with staggering force. He lowered himself to one knee, swallowing hard as he brushed away smaller twigs and leaves. The mother dog flinched, her breaths ragged, but her eyes never left his. There was fear there, yes, but also hope. Hope that he might be the answer she had been holding on to with her last bit of strength. "It's okay, sweetheart," Ethan whispered, his voice barely steady. "I'm here now. I'm gonna help you." Shadow circled anxiously, barking in short bursts, tail stiff, pacing like a tiny guardian on the verge of breaking. Ethan reached out, sliding his hand gently under the mother dog's head. She trembled violently at the shift, but didn't resist. He glanced at the weight, pinning her down a thick, fallen branch, not impossibly heavy for a man to move, but crushing when combined with her weakness. He reached for his radio with his free hand. Dispatch. "This is Officer Ethan," he said, forcing his voice to stay steady despite the tremor in his chest. "I've got an emergency. Injured adult dog severely malnourished, possibly trapped near Forest Ridge Trail. Request animal rescue ASAP." Static crackled through the speaker before a voice responded. "Copy that, officer. Estimated arrival 2 hours." Ethan's jaw clenched. 2 hours. She didn't have 2 hours. He could see it in the way her chest rose in sharp, shallow pulls, in the fading light in her eyes, in the panic pouring off Shadow as the tiny pup pawed desperately at her neck. He clipped the radio back onto his belt. No time to wait. Ethan shrugged off his jacket, folded it into a cushion, and slid it gently beneath her head to ease the pressure against the cold earth. She gave a faint sigh, her body twitching with pain. Shadow barked once in approval, as if encouraging him. "Hang in there," Ethan murmured. "I'm getting you out." He shifted to the fallen branch, planting both hands firmly against the rough surface, his shoulders strained, muscles knotting as he pushed. The branch resisted, groaning against the soil. Sweat stung his eyes, but Ethan gritted his teeth. "Come on, move," he growled through clenched teeth. The wood creaked. Then finally, mercifully, it rolled just enough to free her chest. The mother dog gasped as her lungs expanded a little easier. Shadow yipped in relief, pressing himself against her as if celebrating a small victory. But Ethan knew this was only the first battle. The real fight keeping her alive had just begun. He crouched beside her, sliding his arms carefully under her frail body. She was astonishingly light. Too light. Her ribs grazed his forearms, and he felt each tremor of pain ripple through her. As he lifted her, she whimpered softly, but still didn't resist a sign she was too weak to fight, too trusting to fear. Shadow trotted at Ethan's boots, frantic, determined, urging him to move faster. "I've got you," Ethan whispered, tightening his hold. "I'm not leaving you here." He rose to his feet, the weight of her body so slight, yet so heavy with responsibility it nearly unbalanced him. The forest floor was uneven roots, hidden beneath the soil, threatening every step. Ethan had to grip her tightly, positioning her, so her head rested near his shoulder, her shallow breaths warm but fading against his neck. The darkness pressed closer as they moved. Branches scraped his uniform. Briars snagged his sleeves. His boots slipped on damp moss several times, and once he nearly fell, but he caught himself pulling the mother dog closer, refusing to let her drop. Shadow ran ahead, then circled back, barking when Ethan slowed even a little. The pup's determination pushed him forward. Once he stumbled so hard his knee slammed against the ground. Pain shot up his leg, and the mother dog whimpered from the jolt. Ethan froze, fear tearing through him like lightning. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," he whispered, adjusting her carefully. Her ears twitched, faint but responsive, still fighting. That was enough. He growled through the pain, forcing himself back to his feet. Shoulders, burning arms, numb breath, ragged. Sweat rolled down his face. catching dirt and turning to mud beneath his palms. But he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Shadow stayed close the entire time, tiny paws tapping a constant rhythm of urgency on the forest floor. Minutes stretched like hours. The air felt thicker, heavier. Ethan's breathing echoed loudly in his ears, but he kept going, guided by Shadow's cries and the faint moonlight spilling through thinning trees. Then finally, the forest broke open. They stumbled into a small clearing, silver moonlight washing over them like a quiet blessing. Ethan adjusted his grip, whispering, "Almost there, girl. Stay with me." Her breaths were shallow, so shallow he could barely feel them. Shadow whimpered at his feet, shaking, pleading with him silently. Ethan pushed forward, each step a brutal test of will. His patrol car's headlights glinted through the trees like a beacon. Hope surged through him, giving him enough strength to break into a shaky run. He reached the car, yanked open the back door with his elbow, and gently laid her inside. Shadow scrambled in right after her, pressing into her frail frame, as though shielding her from the world. Ethan jumped into the driver's seat, flicked on his lights and siren, and slammed the accelerator. The night erupted with the wail of urgency. Every mile was a battle. Every second was a countdown. In the rearview mirror, Shadow paced, crying, nudging his mother's still face. "Hold on, Ethan," whispered, voice cracking. "Just hold on." The road blurred under flashing lights, the town ahead glowing faintly in the darkness. And as the veterinary hospital's red sign finally came into view, relief and terror collided inside Ethan's chest. "Stay alive," he pleaded. "For Shadow. For me. Please." The patrol car shot down the empty road, like a streak of blue light against the dark canvas of night. Sirens wailed, echoing through the quiet town, as Officer Ethan tightened his grip on the steering wheel, knuckles white under the flashing dashboard lights. His pulse hammered in his ears, louder than the siren itself. In the back seat, the German Shepherd mother lay motionless, her breath shallow, her ribs rising only in fragile, uneven pools. Shadow paced frantically beside her tiny paws, pattering against the vinyl seat. The pup whined, nudged her with his head, licked her muzzle, then cried again, soft, desperate sounds that stabbed straight through Ethan's chest. "Stay with me," Ethan whispered, barely audible under the scream of the sirens. "Stay with me, girl. Don't let go now." The streets blurred past in streaks of muted color. Street lamps flashed rhythmically onto his windshield, casting fleeting bars of light over his face, revealing the strain carved into every line. He pushed harder on the accelerator, feeling the engine roar in response. A stoplight turned red ahead. Ethan didn't lift his foot. He blasted through the intersection lights, flashing, heart pounding. There was no time, not a second to spare. He could feel her life slipping away in the rearview mirror, each passing moment, another thread fraying at the edge. Shadow's cries filled the car again, high-pitched, trembling, frantic. "I know, buddy. I know," Ethan muttered, voice breaking, eyes locked on the road. "I'm getting her there. I promise." The veterinary clinic finally appeared in the distance, a rectangular silhouette at first, then growing clearer as glowing red letters flickered against the night sky like a beacon of salvation. Maple Ridge Emergency Veterinary Center. Ethan swerved into the parking lot, gravel spraying under the tires as the squad car screeched to a stop. Before the vehicle settled, he yanked the door open and rushed to the back. Shadow leapt out immediately, but Ethan gently scooped the mother dog into his arms before she could be jostled. Her head hung limp against his chest. She was so light, too light, as though life had already begun to slip away. "No. No, no," Ethan whispered fiercely, adjusting his grip, careful not to jostle her fragile frame. "Stay with me. Don't you leave him. Don't you leave me." Shadow barked sharply, as if echoing his desperation. Ethan ran through the sliding doors. The staff inside looked up at the sudden intrusion, the sirens, the limp dog, the frantic puppy. But they sprang into action instantly. "She's critical." Ethan barked, voice raw, breath shaking. "She's barely breathing." She was trapped under debris, malnourished, dehydrated. "Please help her." A team of 2 techs rushed forward with a rolling gurney. Ethan gently laid the mother dog onto the blanket-covered surface. Shadow tried to jump on with her, but one of the techs gently lifted him back, murmuring softly, "We'll take care of her little one." Shadow whined, clawing the air as his mother was pushed down the hallway. Ethan followed a few steps before a nurse held up a hand. "Sir, you'll need to wait in the lobby." The words hit him like a blow. The gurney disappeared around a corner. Shadow let out a cry so heartbreaking that Ethan's knees nearly buckled. "Come here," he whispered, scooping the trembling pup into his arms as he turned toward the waiting room. The sterile white walls of the waiting room felt colder than the forest. The lights hummed too brightly, too harsh against the exhaustion weighing down Ethan's shoulders. He sank into one of the hard plastic chairs, his breath still ragged from the sprint, from the fear choking the back of his throat. Shadow curled at his boots, body trembling, ears drooping. Every few seconds he whimpered and glanced toward the hallway where his mother had vanished. Ethan reached down and gently rested a hand on the pup's back. "She's tough," he murmured. "She made it this far. She's still fighting." But he wasn't sure if he said it for Shadow or for himself. Minutes crawled by, each one stretching painfully slow. Every tick of the clock on the wall echoed like a countdown. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, rubbing his temples with 2 shaking fingers. His mind replayed every moment from the forest. Shadow's desperate cries, the mother's trembling breaths, the way she had looked at him with eyes pleading for help. He clenched his jaw, trying to shake the memory. Then another one surfaced. A younger version of himself, maybe 8 or 9 years old, running barefoot through tall summer grass behind his family home. A golden retriever named Max bounding at his heels, tongue hanging happily, tail wagging like a banner in the wind. Max had been his shadow throughout childhood, loyal, gentle, always ready to nudge Ethan with his nose whenever the boy felt sad or scared. And then came the night Max didn't come home. The frantic search, the sickening dread, the pain of discovering him too late curled beneath a shed after being struck by a car. That grief had carved a quiet scar in Ethan's heart, one he'd tucked away long ago. Now, sitting in that waiting room, the wound reopened raw and vivid. He took a shaky breath. Not again. Not tonight. Shadow whimpered softly. Ethan bent down, rested his forehead against the pup's. "She's going to make it," he whispered. "I swear she will." The words trembled like a prayer. Minutes stretched into nearly an hour. Occasionally, the doors at the end of the hallway swung open, and Ethan's heart jumped each time, only to fall again when it wasn't the veterinarian. Shadow paced anxiously, then crawled into Ethan's lap, curling up in a tiny, shivering ball. Finally, footsteps. Ethan shot upright, heart slamming against his ribs. A figure emerged from the double doors. A veterinarian in a white coat mask, pulled down gloves hanging loosely from one hand. His expression was unreadable. Shadow's ears perked sharply. Ethan stood so fast his chair scraped loudly across the tile. "Tell me," he demanded, voice breaking. The vet paused. His eyes softened. "She's critical," he said carefully. "But because you brought her when you did, she has a chance." The relief that surged through Ethan was so powerful, he nearly collapsed. He pressed a hand over his face, letting out a shaking breath that bordered on a sob. Shadow barked, tail thumping, somehow sensing the shift. The vet crouched beside Ethan, placing a hand on his arm. She's severely malnourished, dehydrated, and suffering from exhaustion. But she's responding to fluids, and she's fighting. Ethan's eyes shimmered as he nodded slowly. She'll need time, the vet added gently. But she isn't giving up. Shadow wriggled free from Ethan's arms and licked his chin, tiny tail, wagging in grateful bursts. Ethan let out a choked laugh, a mix of relief and lingering fear, but it was the first laugh he'd made all night. "You did it, buddy," he whispered, hugging the pup to his chest. "You saved her." Shadow pressed his head into Ethan's neck as if embracing him back. The vet smiled faintly. "He must have gone to find you. Smart little thing." Ethan nodded. Brave little thing. Over the next several days, Ethan visited the clinic every morning before his shift, and every evening after it. The mother shepherd, now stabilized but still frail, lay curled in a warm bed of blankets, hooked up to fluids. Machines beeped softly around her. Shadow never left her side. He curled himself against her chest, tiny body rising and falling with hers, eyes always watchful even when he slept. Whenever she whimpered or stirred, the pup lifted his head, whined softly, and pressed closer. Ethan sat with them, sometimes in silence, sometimes whispering encouragement. "You're stronger than you know," he would tell her quietly, "and he needs you. So keep fighting." At first, her progress was nearly invisible. A slight shift of her paw, a deeper breath, a flicker of awareness in her eyes. But slowly, miraculously, she improved. By the end of the first week, she could lift her head to nuzzle Shadow. By the end of the second, she could stand, wobbly weak, but proudly determined. Shadow barked excitedly each time, tail sweeping the tile floor like a mop, and each time Ethan felt his heart swell tighter, fuller, aching with relief he hadn't realized he'd been holding back. He knew then, deep in his bones, that they weren't strangers anymore. They weren't just victims of circumstance. They were becoming a family. The waiting room felt almost unreal after the chaos of the night before, quieter, softer, as though dawn had wrapped the clinic in a blanket of fragile calm. But Officer Ethan barely felt any of it. He stood just outside the recovery room door, hand resting on the cool metal frame, heart thudding with a mixture of dread and hope. Shadow sat at his feet, tail flicking nervously, ears perked toward the faint beeping sounds drifting from inside. A technician finally stepped out, smiling gently at him. "You can come in now," she whispered. Ethan exhaled shakily, nudged the door open, and stepped inside. The mother shepherd lay on a padded bed, surrounded by pastel blankets. IV lines trailed lightly from her foreleg. Her breathing, though still shallow, was steady. Her eyes fluttered open when she heard them lifting just enough to meet Ethan's gaze. Shadow sprinted forward with a joyous yip, scrambling awkwardly onto the bed. He curled himself against his mother's chest, licking her muzzle with frantic affection. The shepherd let out a soft rumble, her nose nudging him weakly. The sight nearly undid Ethan. He stepped closer and lowered himself into the chair beside her bed. The shepherd turned her head, slowly brushing her muzzle against his hand. Her touch was feather-light, fragile, but grateful. "You're a fighter," Ethan whispered, stroking her gently. "Both of you." Shadow barked in agreement, tail sweeping the blanket. Over the next few days, the clinic became Ethan's second home. Before each shift, he sat with them, sometimes bringing warm towels, sometimes bringing chew toys for Shadow, other times simply resting his hand on the mother dog's side while she slept. After each shift, exhausted, or not, he returned again. The shepherd's progress was slow but undeniable. One morning, she managed to lift her head long enough to lap water from a nurse's hand. Another day, she took her first small meal in nearly a week. Each milestone, small as it was, felt monumental. Shadow celebrated every victory. Whenever she managed a weak tail wag or lifted her head even an inch, he barked excitedly, nuzzling under her chin. Ethan couldn't help but smile each time, warmth spreading through him like a rising sun. The staff noticed it too. "He's bonded to her," one nurse remarked gently one afternoon. "But she's bonding to you." Ethan glanced at the shepherd, who watched him with soft amber eyes, her breath slow and steady. He swallowed hard. "She's been through so much. I just want her to have a chance. You're giving her one," the nurse replied. And deep down, he knew it was true. One evening after a late patrol, Ethan arrived at the clinic to find something he hadn't expected at all. The shepherd was standing, wobbly, weak, legs trembling beneath her, but standing. Shadow hopped around her paws, barking with uncontained excitement, nudging her legs as if cheering her on. A vet tech held her steady by a loose towel sling to make sure she didn't collapse. Ethan froze in the doorway, breath-catching. The shepherd turned her head toward him, her tail moving barely just a single twitch, but enough to speak volumes. Ethan stepped forward, kneeling down and opening his arms. She took 2 shaky steps, then another, and gently lowered her head into his chest. Ethan wrapped both arms around her, pressing his cheek into her fur. His eyes stung. Shadow squeezed himself between them, tail wagging so hard his whole body shook. "You did it, girl," Ethan whispered, voice cracking. "You're unbelievable." She closed her eyes, a soft exhale, leaving her as if she finally felt safe. And in that moment, Ethan knew his life had changed in a way he never saw coming. The following afternoon, as Ethan waited by the reception desk, the veterinarian approached him with paperwork in hand. "She's stable enough to go home soon," the vet said. "But she'll need continued care, and she'll need someone patient, someone she trusts." Ethan hesitated only for a second. "I'll take them," he said firmly. "Both of them." The vet smiled knowingly. "I thought you might say that." Ethan glanced toward the recovery room window, where Shadow was curled against his mother's side, both resting peacefully. "They found me for a reason," Ethan murmured. The vet nodded. "Sometimes they choose their person long before the person realizes it." 3 days later, with medications packed and aftercare instructions reviewed twice, Ethan gently led the shepherd out of the clinic. Shadow trotted beside her in proud little bursts of energy, almost tripping over his own paws. The shepherd moved slowly, but she held her head a little higher with every step. Outside, the late afternoon sun painted the world in warm golden tones. Their shadows, long and stretched, walked together across the sidewalk. Ethan strong and steady, the mother dog recovering but resilient, and Shadow, tiny but determined, bouncing with joy. Ethan glanced down at the two of them, a soft smile tugging at his lips. "Let's go home," he whispered. The shepherd brushed her muzzle gently against his leg. Shadow barked once, sharp, excited, full of life. And just like that, the trio stepped into a new beginning. Ethan's house had never felt so warm. He laid out blankets in the living room, adjusting them until the shepherd settled herself comfortably. Shadow curled against her instantly tiny body, rising and falling with her breaths. Ethan sat nearby on the floor, leaning back against the couch. The room was lit only by a single lamp, casting soft gold across the quiet space. The shepherd lifted her head slightly, looking at him with those gentle, knowing eyes. She nudged her nose into his hand, an instinctive gesture of trust, gratitude, and something even deeper. Shadow climbed into Ethan's lap, licking his chin before curling into a small, warm bundle. And in that stillness, all the emotions Ethan had held back since the night in the forest finally broke through. Tears blurred his vision, tears he didn't bother hiding. He stroked the shepherd's head, whispering, "You're safe now. Both of you." The mother dog exhaled softly, her breath warm against his palm. Shadow pressed closer, as if wanting to share the moment. Ethan closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. Morning sunlight filtered gently through Ethan's living room windows, scattering warm, golden patterns across the floor. It was the first dawn that greeted them as a family, and even in the quiet, something felt different. Softer, fuller, almost sacred. The German shepherd, still weak, but no longer fragile, rested on the thick blanket Ethan had laid out the night before. Her breaths were steady, deeper than they had been in weeks. Shadow was curled against her belly, fast asleep, tiny paws twitching in a dream only puppies understood. Ethan watched them from the kitchen doorway, a warm mug cradled in his hands. He hadn't slept much, but for once, exhaustion felt weightless. Seeing them safe filled a part of him he didn't even know was empty. He stepped closer and crouched beside them. Shadow stirred, blinking groggily before scrambling into Ethan's arms with a happy whine. The pup licked his chin in enthusiastic bursts, tail wagging wildly despite his sleepy state. Okay, Ethan chuckled, rubbing the pup's head. Good morning to you, too. The shepherd lifted her head, eyes soft and glowing with quiet gratitude. She nudged Ethan's hand gently with her nose. The gesture was small, but the depth behind it, trust, acceptance, attachment, struck him so deeply he felt his throat tighten. You're doing better, he whispered, stroking her cheek. You keep fighting, and we'll take it one day at a time. Together. Shadow yipped, as if agreeing with every word. As days passed, the house found its rhythm, one built on healing, gentle milestones and small joys. Each morning, Ethan prepared soft meals for the shepherd, mixing in the medications the vet had prescribed. She ate slowly but consistently, each meal returning color to her coat and strength to her body. Shadow hovered close during every feeding, nudging her bowl when she paused, as though reminding her to keep going. During the afternoons, when Ethan returned from patrol, both dogs would greet him at the door. Shadow was always first, a blur of floppy ears and excited squeals, while the shepherd followed at her own pace, steady and calm, offering Ethan a quiet nuzzle of welcome. Neighbors soon noticed. Children would wave from across the street, calling out to Shadow, who always responded with cheerful barks. Adults paused to admire the shepherd's dignified presence, once frail, now proud and protective. It warmed Ethan every time. His home, once quiet, almost empty, was now filled with life. Sometimes, late at night, Ethan found himself sitting on the living room floor with the two dogs curled beside him. In those moments, he let himself think about things he hadn't faced in years. About Max. About the grief he had buried under layers of duty and silence. About the pieces of his heart he thought would never fully mend. The shepherd would lift her head and rest it gently in his lap, as if sensing every shadow that passed through him. Shadow would climb into his arms, licking away the heaviness before it settled too deep. And Ethan realized something simple, profound, and almost overwhelming. He hadn't just rescued them. They were rescuing him, too. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky with streaks of gold, and rose, Ethan sat on the front porch with Shadow in his lap. The shepherd lay beside his chair, her tail brushing softly against the wooden boards. The air was calm. The world seemed perfectly still. Ethan looked at them, at this unlikely little family, forged by desperation and courage, and felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The kind of peace that settles deep in the soul, the kind that feels like coming home after being lost for a long, long time. He exhaled slowly. Sometimes he murmured gently. Stroking Shadow's back, the smallest cries lead us to the biggest miracles. Shadow tilted his head, as if understanding. The shepherd nudged his leg warm and steady. Ethan smiled a quiet, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "We're together now," he whispered, "and we're not letting go." And under the fading summer light, wrapped in the quiet breath of 2 lives he had saved, and who had saved him in return, Officer Ethan finally felt whole again. The first night passed in a gentle hush, a kind of quiet that felt almost sacred. Ethan sat on the edge of his couch long after the house had fallen, still watching Shadow and the German Shepherd sleep side by side on their blanket nest. Soft lamplight washed over them, turning their fur into strokes of warm gold. Their breathing rose and fell in a slow, synchronized rhythm, proof that they were finally safe. But for Ethan, safety brought something else, too. Emotion. Real, raw, unfiltered. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped tightly, as memories he had spent years burying cracked through the surface. The frantic night in the woods replayed in flashes, the darkness, the whimpers, the crushing fear that he might be too late. And threaded through it all was an older ache, one tied to a golden retriever who had once been his whole world. Max. The pain of losing him had carved a hollow place inside Ethan that he never truly filled. He had told himself he was fine, that life moved on, that grief eventually quieted. But sitting in this warm, dim room with 2 rescued lives sleeping peacefully at his feet, he felt the truth stir. He had been lonely far longer than he realized. Suddenly, the weight of it all pressed against him. His throat tightened. His breath hitched. Tears welled before he could stop them. The shepherd lifted her head at the sound of his shaky breath. Even weak, even healing, she sensed him. With slow, careful movements, she pushed herself forward, resting her muzzle gently on his knee. Ethan's resolve finally shattered. A tear slipped down his cheek, then another. He reached out with a trembling hand, laying it softly on her head. She closed her eyes into his touch, offering comfort with every quiet breath she shared. "You made it," he whispered, voice breaking. "You fought so hard." Shadow stirred at the tremor in his voice. The tiny pup clambered into Ethan's lap, licking at the tears he couldn't hide, his little tail thumping with pure, unfiltered love. Ethan choked out a laugh, fragile, cracked at the edges, but real. He wrapped an arm around Shadow while his other hand stayed resting on the shepherd's warm fur. "You two," he whispered, swallowing hard. "You didn't just survive out there. You saved me too." The shepherd inched closer, leaning her weight into his leg. Shadow pressed his face against Ethan's chest, sighing softly. And in that tender, tear-streaked moment, surrounded by the quiet breaths of the 2 lives he had fought to save, Officer Ethan felt something shift inside him, something gentle, something healing. For the first time in years, he wasn't carrying his burdens alone. He had a family now, a real one. And he knew without question that he would spend the rest of his life protecting them, just as they had protected his heart. The days that followed settled into a quiet harmony Ethan hadn't known he needed. His home, once silent after long shifts, now echoed with the soft rhythm of paws across the floor and the gentle thump of a wagging tail. Shadow greeted him every afternoon with excited twirls and joyful squeaks, while the German shepherd, steadier, stronger with each passing day, walked to him with calm pride, leaning her head into his hand, as if to say, "Welcome back." Neighbors noticed the change, too. Kids waved whenever Ethan passed by with the pups trotting beside him. Adults paused to smile at the once frail shepherd, now carrying herself with a quiet, dignified strength. Ethan felt something warm bloom inside him, each time pride, gratitude, maybe even a touch of awe. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, Ethan sat on his porch, with Shadow curled in his lap, and the shepherd resting at his feet. The sky glowed orange and violet, the kind of sunset that made the world feel soft around the edges. He breathed in the stillness, letting the moment settle deep in his chest. Looking down at the little pup in his arms, he whispered, "You were so small, and you carried the biggest courage I've ever seen." Shadow tilted his head, tail tapping lightly against Ethan's arm. The shepherd nudged his leg, offering her quiet strength. Ethan smiled a real gentle smile that reached all the way to his eyes. Sometimes he murmured, voice soft, as the fading light, the smallest cries lead us to the biggest miracles. And under the warm glow of a closing day with Shadow and the shepherd nestled close, Officer Ethan understood something simple and true. They weren't just a rescue, they were a family. A miracle woven from fear, courage, and love found on a night when a tiny puppy dared to hope. If the story of Officer Ethan's Shadow and the brave mother touched your heart, please consider leaving a like to support their journey. And if you believe that small moments can create the biggest miracles, make sure to subscribe so you won't miss any of our upcoming inspiring stories. We'd also love to hear from you in the comments. What part of this story moved you the most? Have you ever experienced a moment when a dog saved you in an unexpected way? Thank you for watching until the end. We'll see you in the next story from RA Stories, where every small creature has a big story worth telling.